Discover the secrets of captivating storytelling with Molly Brandenburg, a veteran podcaster who's hosted more than 600 episodes. From UFO conspiracies to haunted theaters, Molly shares her journey through the fascinating world of podcasting. Learn how improvisational skills can elevate your storytelling and why finding the essence of a story is crucial. Join us as we explore the art of narrative, the power of saying yes and the importance of finding meaning in every tale. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Podcasting Secrets. Today, I'm joined by Molly Brandenburg. Molly is a voice artist, a visual artist, a writer, and she was a podcast host on Parcast. She's hosted more than 600 podcast episodes for Parcast Studios, and we're super grateful that she's agreed to join us on the show today. Thanks, Molly, for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to meet you. This is great.
Molly, can you start off by sharing with us your story, kind of your journey in the podcasting world?
It was a welcome surprise, a welcome kind of a career change for me when I became a podcast host. I got an offer to interview for the Parcast Studios, and it came through a close friend of mine, Greg Paulson. And he was an old friend. We'd done a lot of performing together and a lot of improvisation. We studied with Gary Austin, who was the acting and improvisation teacher, he created the Groundlings Theater, which is very notable theater in Los Angeles. And a lot of the talent from Saturday Night Live has come out of there. And so there was a big connection between Gary and a lot of the hosts who came in to work at Parcast, which I don't think most people know about that, but it is an interesting connection. One of the other hosts, a very significant host at Parcast, is Wendy McKenzie, and Wendy was married to Gary, and Wendy knew the Cutler family, and because she'd worked on their radio programs back like in the 90s. And so when they were going to start the Parcast Studios, they thought to contact Wendy first. And they thought, well, she'd be a great host for the show. And then they said, well, who else do you know? And those connections became, a lot of the heart and soul of the hosts who became the hosts at Parcast.
That's a really fun connection. What did you do before you interviewed for that position?
I was doing different voiceover jobs here and there. I worked a lot with a producer named Roger Rittner and done some audiobooks and advertising. And I'd also had a pretty long career as a advertising copywriter for the movie studios. So that was a long career that I had. And then I started doing voiceovers. It sort of grew out of some of that because I was working on some videos that I helped write for a business company. And hadn't really planned it, but then I started doing voiceovers for some of the videos as well as co-writing. And then that I met Roger Rittner, and that became kind of a whole other career for me. So you never know. But
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but when
you have talent, these doors just keep opening for you.
Well, and you got to be open to what presents itself. But I had come here, as a student to do theater and study voice. So I have always had that background. And yeah, one thing leads to another. And, one of the rules of improvisation that Gary used to emphasize a lot is you have to keep saying yes, and then I'll do this, and then I'll do that. And, doors can keep opening. I mean, the danger in life, I think, for all of us is if we start to close. No, I'm not going to go there. No, I'm not going to explore that opportunity. I mean, when the opportunity to work for Parcast came up, I didn't really know what it was, but I trusted my friend Greg and I trusted Wendy. And they said, no, this is a really interesting opportunity, and it's a great place. So maybe you could come join us. So I'm glad I did.
Love it. So a theater student who found a new platform, a new stage in podcasting.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Parcast and what you did there?
Well, I'm Max Cutler. Was a very young man, very talented man, and I got to come in. I talked to him on the phone first, and then I went out to the studio to meet him. And, sometimes you walk into a place and you can feel sort of like, oh, this has a really bright energy to it. I felt very welcome. I felt it was like exciting and also kind of like there was an element of fun there. And Max was growing the company. It's fascinating to watch the work that he did to take something that started out small, and there was this opportunity as podcasting was just starting to just explode. And Parcast was part of that. And amazing, and utilizing the internet to get an audience and get more of an audience, more and more. And then what is the audience like? Should we do more of that? True crime or mystery stories or stories about aliens and UFOs and Bigfoot. Responding to the audience. And also a lot of the stories on podcast were really fascinating with the element of history, which I really enjoyed. There's a lot of history about things that happened in American politics in the last century, a lot about the history of both wars, and then, delving into things that happen with our government, stories about, the CIA and MK Ultra. And, it's fascinating information. And how I think if you really listen to a lot of the stories on Parcast, you can see this through line between, well, this happened. And then, we ramped up to World War II. And then, there was Hitler. And then what happened to Hitler? And did somebody steal his brain? And who became the president after the war? And then the next president. And then he was assassinated. Why did that happen? I mean, all those stories have been explored. And then offshoots from it's fascinating information. I learned a lot. And it was, there's an audience for it. People want to be informed. People want to, know about these things that they're intrigued by, that speak to them and they want to know more about them.
People want to hear great stories.
Yeah.
Sounds like if I had to summarize what you did at the company and what that company did, the company told great stories and you were the storyteller.
Yeah.
Does that sum it up well?
Yes. With my partners too. I got to partner with great hosts. Richard Rossner and I did many, many shows together. One was called Unexplained Mysteries. The other one was called Gone. And Carter Roy and I did conspiracy theories together. He's still doing a version of the show, but we did many, many episodes. And, the conspiracies, they're endless. But it was a very educational approach, which I think is important. It didn't just go down a rabbit hole. It's what's going on? Is there something to this? I mean, let's look at what some of the experts have said. Let's look at what the history is and really question. Let's not just believe every theory we hear, And of course, a lot of things we have answers. We can only guess, but make an educated guess.
So of these 800 episodes that you've done, do you have one that's one of your favorites?
Well, I just loved so many of them. There are a few that really stand out. There's one that we did on conspiracy theories on Parcast. It's called The Hollow Moon. I thought it was beautifully written, but here's the funny thing. It was a fascinating story about this theory about the hollow moon. Is the moon this hollow entity? They talked a lot about a physicist in the story. Well, it turns out the person they wrote about, he was my brother. He is my brother. And the writers didn't know. And they didn't ask me, which is really funny. But he's a big part of that story because he worked in government and defense and things like that. And my brother, Dr. John Brandenburg, you look him up. He's actually been interviewed on Ancient Aliens. He's got a lot of stories to tell. So that was like a really funny kind of overlap that we've had. But that's a really good story. Gosh, there's just so many. All the stories about there were some stories we did about aliens, and supposedly there was one race of aliens. I love this story. They're called the Greys. And the legend goes that these people or entities came to Earth and they met with the presidents and met with them. But the thing that really touched me about this story was they said the reason they wanted to meet with the president supposedly was they're concerned about nuclear war. And these aliens said that when the bomb went off, Hiroshima, I don't know the right way to say it. Anyway, when the nuclear bomb went off during World War II, it was such a profound incident. As they told it in the story, it tore a hole in the universe. It made a tear in the universe. And that these aliens were concerned that what humans were doing that is so destructive to the universe, it would destroy all life everywhere. So if there really are aliens in some other universe somewhere, who knows? But it touched me profoundly to think that the human race could be so destructive, we could destroy everything. And, maybe it's a little fairy tale that somebody made up, but the thought of President Eisenhower sitting with some aliens and having a meeting about this is a little bit comical to me. But I think at the heart of it, there's something very profound. I mean, we're going to destroy everything if we don't stop the way we live. And I love telling these stories because there was always something in it that could be pretty deep.
I love that. I love that you were able to find that deep meaning in that.
Yeah.
So you question this one, whether or not this one is true or not, and who knows. Was there one of these conspiracy story shows that you did, and after you did it, you're like, I really think that's true. Like it convinced you of something that was, I don't know. Is there one of those you'd want to share?
Well, there was another one about the people who worked on the Manhattan Project, and that was pretty chilling. And I actually did have a relative who was a physicist, and he, as a young man, had been part of the Manhattan Project. And I think that at the time, they were just getting all these students and young physicists to work on this. I'm not sure that they really knew what it was all going to lead to. And I had an uncle named Will Seary, and he had been part of it. And I'm sure it must have affected him profoundly because he did beautiful work later in his life. He was the first president of the Sierra Club. And I know that, I don't know, there was just something that touched me personally about it, knowing him, what a good man he was. But here, again, our government is saying, here, let's get all this talent here and we're going to make something. Well, it turns out we make something that could destroy the entire universe. And in that story about the Manhattan Project, there was a story that they were trying to test it before they actually used the bomb. And, you had a couple of these scientists out there going, well, should we pull the lever and try it? We don't, it could go either way. It could just destroy everything. And then they did it without knowing. And I mean, it's kind of inconceivable that
to take that risk, even if it was a very small risk, right? Even if it was a 1% risk, right? That's a pretty massive risk to take.
What if you think, well, there's a town over there with like 200 people, they might all die, but we have to check it out. I mean, you think, my God, it's horrifying. So that, that story, that really hit me. And I remember after we recorded it, it was, I can't even believe it. Yeah. Although on the flip side, there were a couple stories we did that were so funny. They're so absurd that we couldn't stop laughing. We could hardly get through it. Like Bigfoot.
What was the most absurd story that you ever covered?
Oh my God, it was so hysterical. There was an incident in this little town. We did this story on Unexplained Mysteries, and there was an incident in a town and it was probably 100 years ago, but these gooey blobs started falling out of the sky. And people were like, what is this? It's just some little town in Ohio or something. What is this? What is this? What are these things? And they couldn't figure it out. And we were being attacked. And what is this stuff? And it was sort of a gooey meat. I think they called it the meat shower.
Oh.
And, oh my God, is God punishing us? What is this? Or is it like a plague of locusts or something? Is it a biblical thing? But I mean, it was a true thing that happened. What they finally think it was there could be a flock of turkeys, and turkeys get really excited, and they were flying, and then they spat out all this stuff. It just landed. It kind of became a cyclone of this regurgitated meat and fell on the town. The Kentucky meat shower. Unexplained mysteries. That was a good one. That was that was hard to get through that one.
Today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is sponsored by PodUp, the ultimate podcasting platform. As podcasters, we're always looking for ways to simplify our workflows, grow our reach, and make more money. What if I told you that there's a tool that combines more than 35 essential podcasting features into one platform? That's exactly what PodUp offers, and it's transforming how we create, grow, monetize, publish, syndicate, and do so many other things with our podcasting content. From recording and editing to website building and audience engagement, PodUp covers virtually the entire podcasting process. What sets PodUp apart is its focus on growth and monetization. The platform includes AI-powered features that help you save time on tasks like creating short video clips and transcribing episodes. It also offers tools for guest management, content syndication, and email list building, all accessible from one centralized dashboard. For those of you looking to turn your podcast into a revenue stream, PodUp provides integrated monetization tools to help you market products, courses, and services directly to your audience. What's even better is that with PodUp, you don't have to waste time and money switching between multiple softwares to produce your podcast. With PodUp, you get all 35 modules within one fully integrated platform and for a fraction of the cost. If you're interested in simplifying your podcast workflow while expanding your reach and making some money while you're at it, check out podup.com. That's PODUP.com and get a free trial of the software. Now back to the show. So you're a master storyteller. What does our audience need to know? What are the most important things for them to know about becoming amazing storytellers?
Well, I think it's good to have a sense of, and you can get this way if you read a lot or see things, see theater, see movies, all these things, you kind of get a sense of what is the essence of the story. If you're going to give a lot of details, and then you kind of have to wind up, what's it really all about? I mean, never lose that sense of what is this? What are we telling people? With the Manhattan Project, a very fearful thing happened, and we came that close. I mean, it was horrific anyway, but it could have been even worse. I think that was the point of that story.
Or keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah. And then, but it sort of depends on how long your story is, but it's good to have a sense of like a structure too. You're going to open with something, then you get into the detail. Okay, what's the conflict? What's going on there? And then ultimately, what's the message you want to give someone? The danger of some stories, if it just meanders so much all over the place, and then people say, I lost the plot. What's the plot of this? I don't get what's going on. You got to kind of bring them out, bring them back home, So always structure, have a good...
Even going back to the Saturday Night Live days, right? You've got to have the punchline too.
Right.
You can't finish the skit without the punchline.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And, and sometimes you can kind of, if you can get to that end and kind of get to the punchline and then, kind of bring it home. You just underline it, I told a story recently about a wonderful woman who passed this year, and she'd been quite a dynamic person in Los Angeles theater. So we all were telling stories about her at the memorial. The story I wanted to share about her name is Carol Reese. Atop of all these incredible things she'd done in creating theater, and she created theater with great stories for women, which was really important in this theater company. I was in the Company of Angels because, a lot of plays, especially a lot of older plays, they don't have any parts for women. It was just sign of the time. So Carol kind of turned that situation on its head and created more parts for women, casting, blind gender casting or getting new plays that were more women oriented. But there was another aspect of Carol was that she had insight, and I would say she kind of had second sight, as they say, because there was an incident that happened. We were rehabbing an old restaurant and turning it into a new theater because the theater we'd had before had burned down. And I'll try to make this short, but anyway, we were rehabbing this theater. We were going to reopen the theater. Was a play we were going to do, Waiting for Lefty, and we were all set to do that. And I was painting one of the back rooms, and Carol and another person walked by while I was painting, and she said, "Wait, hold on. There's something behind you. There's something right there." And I was like at the wall, painting the wall. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "No, there's an entity. There's a very evil entity behind you." And I'm painting the wall. "What are you talking about?" And she said, "We can't open the theater because of that. There's a thing. It's right there. It's very evil." And I was like, "Oh my God, you know." So I talked to the president of the theater, and he said, "We have to open the theater. We spent all the money we had. We have to open and get in business." And he said, "Look, let them do it. If they want to do an exorcism or whatever, they can do whatever they want, but we got to open the theater." So they brought one of the actresses in who kind of knew how to do a ceremony and holy water and blessed the entity and kind of asked it to leave. So we're like, "Okay, Carol," you know. So a little while later, I went to a party, a business party mixer thing with the LA Weekly, because our theater was advertising with the LA Weekly at the time, and that weekly office was right by ours. So I went to the party. And I talked to a couple women, and I said, "Oh, we're so excited. We've rehabbed that old restaurant. We're going to make it into a theater. We're about to open, and we got such a good deal on the rent. It's in Silver Lake." And they said, "Well, it's no wonder you got a good deal on the rent. Guy hung himself in the back room there."
Oh my goodness.
And I stepped back, and it was true. And the story checked out. It was very tragic. But this restaurant had been sitting closed for a couple of years because of what happened, and it was during AIDS and all that. So anyway, we blessed him. We opened the theater. It was very successful, and that theater still exists. It's called the Lyric Theater on Hyperion in Silver Lake. I'm very proud. It's still performance space, been redone beautifully too. But there was one night when we were doing the show, Waiting for Lefty. It was a big hit, ran for a long time. I was in it, and the way we had it set up, we had the stage and then the theater seats. And then at the back, what used to be the restaurant's bar, that's where we had the light board. So my friend Judith was running the light board. And then when you're on stage, you could see her. You could see the audience. You could see her. And there was one night, several people came up to her and said, "Who's that guy who was standing by you? He was dressed in white." And she said, "There wasn't anybody. I was alone the whole time." And several people said it to her. And Paul Brennan was the head of our theater at the time. I told Paul about it. He goes, "Well, see, he's happy now. We made him feel better, so he came back to pay a visit."
To watch the show.
But,
That's funny.
Well, like Gary said, say yes, yes, and our theater burned down. We needed another place. This is what we could afford. And now is a very good location. We were sort of pioneers over there at Silver Lake at the time, but okay, it's haunted, but bless him and ask him to be on his way, go to heaven. You shouldn't come back here anymore. You scared people. But
you just need to do some more spooky shows at it.
Right. And, here's a very perceptive theater creative person. She saw what no one else saw.
Yeah.
It just really stuck.
Okay, so yes, and what are some of the other most important things that podcasters need to know to be great storytellers?
Well, I think, you know what? I think yes, and that is the heart of the classic improvisation teaching. And I think, take an improv class, or, if you can't go to one, go to some on YouTube, because, improv, it's like, you got to be in the moment, think in the moment, react and continue. The story has to continue. You can't just go, I'm in a bad mood. I don't want to finish the podcast. I'm not in the mood for it anymore. No, you have to keep going and, see where the story is going to take you. And I think if you're interviewing people too and sharing stories, listen, did they say something that could open the door to something else that's fascinating that they might be able to tell you? I mean, people are so multidimensional, I think that's, I think we sort of tend to, pigeonhole people a lot with what is their profession and what do they do. But, people, just any person is got so much going on. And if you can get them to open up about it and share their story, it's fascinating. I was just thinking about, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, she just passed. And if you can believe it, I once had a chance to work with her for a little bit. And I was just, I was working for an editor in New York. I was just out of college, and he told me, oh, I need you to transcribe some radio shows and edit them for this woman. She's a wonderful woman. She's about to become very famous, but nobody knows who she is right now. It was Dr. Ruth. So I did that for her. And then she came in, I got to meet her. She was just absolutely delightful and charming. But, here's who would think the big sex therapist and frank talk about sex is a little woman who was a Holocaust survivor. I mean, who would, you wouldn't make that up. You would, that couldn't happen, but it did happen. And I'm sure some of what the experiences she had and so many losses she experienced, she wanted to heal people. Anyway, there's another story.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about being a good listener. To be a good storyteller, you've got to be a good listener. Why is that so important?
You can tell a story, but you can just say, I worked at the theater. There was like a guy that died in there. Okay. But, pay attention to the other details, and the story is enriched, It happened that the people across the street actually knew about the rent situation there. Why was the rent so low? Why? Because this happened. And, then it becomes, and then suddenly you're in this paranormal situation. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, we're just repainting the place, and all of a sudden we find out this person had died. And the other part of it is a close friend of ours had died from AIDS recently. And so I was still recovering from that. And I talked to a spiritual person about that. And I said, I don't understand why I didn't feel, I'm going to get all woo-woo and paranormal here, but hey, what the heck, I was painting the corner, and Carol said there's an entity right there. And I would have thought I would be sensitive to that, but I wasn't. So I asked another woman recently who's a spiritual person. I said, why didn't I know he was there? And she said her thinking was that when people become spirits, for a spirit, a ghost, to be able to actually make any contact with a human, a three-dimensional person, takes a huge amount of energy. It's very hard to do. Anyway, that's what they say. And she said at that time, so this was about 1990, people were afraid of AIDS. Not everybody was going to be very accepting of even hearing that someone had died of AIDS, but one of my best friends had just died, and another one. And she felt that this entity at least knew I would be sympathetic to what happened to him. And that's why he presented himself enough that my friend Carol saw him. I know we're getting into like a weird territory here, but that was my experience. And, I'd say it's crazy. Carol was just being a nut, saying there was a ghost behind me, but then it was borne out that a person hung himself exactly where I was standing, and she knew. So I'm getting the chills.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. What are some of the biggest mistakes people make in sharing stories, and how do we avoid those?
I would think that you have to be careful as far as if you're getting into personal stories about your own life, maybe unresolved issues about people. I think you need to think that through, perhaps. Some people might say, talk about a family member that they're angry with or something like that. I think there's certain areas you need to think about how much you want to share. Especially if you're being critical of someone who's alive, I'd say things like that, it might be good to like write it out in advance. What do I want to talk about? Is there a way to talk about some of these things? Be honest, but at the same time, keep some diplomacy. You don't want to put a bad, you don't want to ruin relationships by being a little bit too frank or, vulgar or that kind of thing. We're we're such an open society now, but there's a danger in that too. People talk about their ex-spouses or whatever, and sometimes people, I think, can maybe be a little bit too frank. This is my personal feeling.
Yeah. It's good to tell stories that have resolution. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
My wife will not read a book unless it has a happy ending, right? It's got to have reached that resolution. And if there's a book that ends with a cliffhanger, she's just not going to read that book until the next one comes out.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't appreciate it if we don't bring our stories to good resolution.
Well, and even, tragedies, there can still be a feeling of resolution. I mean, maybe there could be a tragedy, but maybe somebody learned something from it. Maybe they went on to do something positive based on what they had gone through,
right.
Which is a way to keep it, meaningful. I mean, I was just thinking the other night, it's like there's so many movies and things you can see, but, I know what it's like for my mother wouldn't see anything that didn't have a happy ending because she'd grown up with a lot of tragedy in her early life. And I mean, I get it. And I don't want to see a movie about somebody dying of AIDS. I've been there. I've seen it in real life. I don't need to see a movie about it. I think it's for people that haven't. So yeah, my feeling is a tragic story can still have a resolution that can be positive. And I mean, I think we all, we want to learn from our experiences and not feel lost. The stories that don't resolve very well, people, it's like, I feel lost. It didn't, everybody just died and then it was over.
What is one of the biggest challenges you faced in your podcasting journey? And how did you get through that?
Sometimes things end before we expect them and before we're prepared. So I've gone through some of that. And it is hard, but I think every time you go through a loss, even if it can be a really major, devastating loss, something ends, a career path ends, you may be challenged to, get up, figure out what are you going to do next. Maybe you're supposed to do something with what you already learned. And maybe
kind of goes back to your yes and philosophy, right? Yes, this problem just hit me in the face, and what am I going to do next?
Right. And because the thing is, I mean, life does go on, and we can learn from tragedy. We can learn from loss. I mean, I think we're compelled to. I think you have to. Otherwise, you become a person who's just sort of like, given up, or you lose your vitality. You don't want to lose your vitality. You want to keep vital. And I think you do that by always asking the questions and then listening for what's the next answer? What's the next path for me? This thing ended. What should I do next?
Thank you so much for sharing, Molly. Unfortunately, we're out of time here. If our audience has enjoyed getting to know you and they want to get to know you a little bit better and maybe some of the projects you're working on, what are the best ways for them to do that?
I have a website that's mollybrandenburg.com. So that's probably the best way to find me. I'm also on Instagram at Molly Brandenburg 1. I have a lot of my artwork on there, and then new things that I'm going to be working on, I'll put on the website. And I always put them on Instagram. But yeah, I mean, we just have to keep exploring. We have to keep listening, saying yes. And what's next?
Yes, and
That's
next? Right. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode today, Molly.
It's been such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you.
And here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, storytelling is an art that transcends mediums, from literature to theater and film. Number 2, the essence of story is crucial. Always keep sight of what message you're conveying to your audience. Number 3, good storytelling requires structure, an opening, details, conflict, and ultimately a message or resolution. Number 4, being a good listener is essential for effective storytelling. It helps uncover fascinating details and new directions. Number 5, improvisation skills can greatly enhance storytelling abilities, teaching you to think in the moment and continue the narrative. Number 6, people are multidimensional. A good interviewer can uncover fascinating stories by encouraging subjects to open up. Number 7, when sharing personal stories, be mindful of unresolved issues and consider the potential impact on relationships. Number 8, the tragic stories can have positive resolutions if they lead to growth, learning, or positive change. Number 9, when faced with unexpected endings or losses in your career, stay open to new opportunities and pass forward. And finally, number 10, maintaining vitality in life and storytelling involves continually asking questions and listening for the next answer or path. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I wish you success in your podcast. And if you're looking for an amazing podcast platform with more than 50 tools integrated together for one low price, one username and password, I recommend you check out PodUp and get a free trial at podup.com.